Welcome to ILTV Weekly. I'm Steve Leibowitz, and joining me today are former Knesset member Dr. Einat Wilf and Dr. Martin Sherman, director of the Israel Institute for Strategic Studies. Well, all eyes are on the upcoming White House summit between Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and U.S. President Donald Trump. Ahead of his trip, Netanyahu addressed the cabinet and emphasized that he will seek to promote what he called responsible policies at the Trump meeting, indicating that he plans to push back against the rising right-wing voices in his cabinet and coalition, pressing for new territorial demands in the West Bank, or as we and the Bible call it, Judea and Samaria. We will hear now from Netanyahu speaking from the airport tarmac and from former U.S. Ambassador to Israel, Dan Shapiro, who's still here in Tel Aviv, and points out similarities in Middle East policy between the new Trump administration and that of former President Obama as it relates to settlements.
The alliance between Israel and America has always been extremely strong. It's about to get even stronger. President Trump and I see eye to eye on the dangers emanating from the region, but also on the opportunities. And we'll talk about both, as well as upgrading the relations between Israel and the United States in many, many fields.
אדוני, אתה עדיין בעד נאום בר אילן וחלוקה לשתי מדינות? רגע, אנחנו באנגלית עכשיו.
תבוא איתי, אתה תשמע תשובות ברורות.
We've seen some very cautious, very careful statements coming out of the White House, suggesting that U.S. policy has not changed that much, that a desire to help achieve Middle East peace, which I think can only be achieved through a two-state solution between Israelis and Palestinians, is still very much on the agenda. And while existing settlements may need to be accommodated in such an agreement, unrestricted settlement construction is not helpful to achieving that goal. So I think in many respects, campaign promises get reshaped into something less dramatic once the reality of governing hits.
Well, Dr. Sherman, Ambassador Shapiro seems to think that there's not very much difference between the Obama administration's policy and that of President Trump. Do you expect that there will be a more severe difference than the ambassador is indicating?
Well, I certainly hope so, and I think there's reason to be hopeful because people in the Trump entourage are far more robust and assertive in their approach than the Obama administration. But just picking up on what the ambassador said, he said that settlement construction is not helpful to advance peace. Well, we know one thing for sure: freezing the settlements wasn't much help either. So, I really hope that Netanyahu isn't confusing responsible policy with reticence and hesitance, because I do believe this is the time to set forward an assertive, robust agenda and take off the agenda once and for all the grotesque idea of a Palestinian statehood. Because I cannot understand how anyone, especially enlightened liberals, would advance the idea of establishing yet another homophobic, misogynistic, Muslim-majority tyranny on the doorstep of Tel Aviv, adjacent to the main Israeli highway, overlooking our international airport. So I really hope that this is one of the messages that Netanyahu can drive home to the administration.
Well, Einat, the Jewish Home Party leader is insisting that Netanyahu resist mentioning a two-state solution in his talks with Trump, and he's pushing for his backing of Israeli annexation of parts of the West Bank, at least at this stage. I mean, that's what he's pushing for inside the cabinet, and some of the Likud ministers seem to sound the same way. Is Netanyahu likely to take a different approach?
Probably. First of all, I actually think this is not the most important thing on Netanyahu's agenda. If I were the prime minister of a small nation, highly dependent on the United States, my first concern would be to find out what the president of this power says about America first. What does it mean for Israel when a President Trump speaks about America first? Does it mean that America is going to let the world burn while it enjoys the fact that it has two oceans protecting it from the mayhem of the world? Does it mean that it will talk tough but actually not take any action in the Middle East? This has far, far, far greater impact on Israel than specific questions of settlements. So I think really on his agenda are more issues of geopolitics. What does America mean? What are its commitments to its allies? What will it mean for Iran, for its nuclear policies, for Russia, for Syria? I think all of these issues are far higher on his agenda than anything else.
All right, well, coming back, though, to the issue of settlements, which certainly in Israel is high on our agenda in terms of knowing what it is that the Trump policy is. During the Bush administration, Dr. Sherman, there was a letter that was sent to the Israeli government, which essentially agreed to the concept of Israel building inside the settlement blocks, in effect, inside the security fence. Is that a policy that you could see the Trump administration endorsing?
Well, just before I address that issue, just commenting on what Einat was saying, I think she brings up valid points, but they are not part of Israeli policy. You're asking what the Americans think is not part of formulating Israeli policy. So I do think that Netanyahu needs to be far more proactive. As far as the major settlement blocks go, I think that's a red herring. It was initiated before there was a security barrier, if you remember. Because if you look at the major settlement blocks like Ariel, like Ma'ale Adumim, like Gush Etzion, if you are only to include that and you need territorial continuity between them, the border will be tremendously contorted and difficult to defend, never mind to secure. So, and quite apart from the fact that if you were to annex those territories or extend Israeli sovereignty to those large blocks, it torpedoes any chance of finding even the most conceivably moderate Palestinian as an interlocutor. So I think that the issue of the large blocks of settlement is a red herring. I think that Israel needs to extend its sovereignty over the entire area, and then find a way to deal with the other population living there. And I think something can go into perhaps another talk.
Yeah, but that won't be the discussion. Yeah. I don't know that will be the discussion in the summit.
Well, if you're going to undermine or question the issue of two states for two people, you cannot avoid the question of discussing what will be the fate of the Arab residents in the territories.
All right, Einat, the idea of that letter from
Yes.
Bush inside the settlement blocks, is that something that you would consider to be an option that Israel could jump on, could support?
Personally, yes. First, we need to remember that the Bush letter was given in the context of disengagement. So it was given in the context of Israel demonstrating its willingness to take substantial actions to forgo territory that could become part of a Palestinian state. And also the acknowledgement of the so-called facts on the ground was only in the context of a final agreement. People read the Bush letter as if it gave some carte blanche to Israel to just build, but it wasn't. It was a kind of more quiet acknowledgement that in a future agreement, such blocks will be part of Israel. I think, and Netanyahu could go further, but it's not in his nature to be so clear. I mean, if I were in the position, I would want Israel to finally draw its eastern border. I would draw it very mildly, 2 to 4% of the West Bank. Indeed, not Ariel, because it's not a defensible border. Keep it very much close to the armistice lines and try to get a tacit American agreement that while Israel keeps those blocks, it is renouncing any territorial claim to anything beyond it. But this is not something that Netanyahu will do. Netanyahu will try to probably get as much as he can with paying as little as he can, and actually to try to keep the policy fuzzy. To his benefit is actually not to have clear borders, clear declarations. Anything that he can have which will be unclear, I think will be to his benefit.
All right, before we go on with the discussion, let's hear a few more comments on the upcoming summit from the editor of the Times of Israel and perhaps from the top leader in American Jewry.
I think Iran will be number one. I do think security cooperation maybe the embassy move, maybe...
You think he's going to bring up the embassy move, or would Trump like to sort of see that promise fade into the background and not deal with it right now?
I don't know, but I think they can talk about how it could be done constructively, smartly, without necessarily arousing confrontation.
On the Israeli-Palestinian front, I think what has been striking is the vindication of those of us who warned that Trump would be unpredictable. Not because there's any devious stuff going on here, but because he's got no track record and different people are speaking to him and they're producing what we saw already at the weekend, which was an interview with Israel Hayom, which is the paper owned by Sheldon Adelson, who presumably, who we know gave money to the Trump campaign and so on. So Trump was not looking to offend Israel or Israel Hayom, and yet he was critical of settlements. He said, settlements not a good idea for peace, That was quite striking. The White House spokesman had said, it may not be helpful to be building new settlements. Trump was more forthright than his own spokesman in an interview where he was being very warm and said very nice things about Israel. I don't intend to criticize Israel openly and so on, condemn Israel. They've been through enough or whatever he said there. But he was, if Obama had said something like Trump said on settlements, the Israeli government would have been very upset. The Israeli government is preferring not to make too much of a fuss about the comments, but it shows that you have a president who doesn't have a track record on anything because he's new to politics, and there are going to be all sorts of extraordinary things said.
Einat, I was kind of surprised when I was interviewing Malcolm Hoenlein that he spoke about the embassy move as something that he thinks will come up. Is there any chance that the end of that meeting between Trump and Netanyahu will include an announcement that the U.S. Embassy is being moved to Jerusalem?
I would bet not. First of all, I don't think this is high on the Prime Minister's agenda. In fact, I would think it's pretty low. And I think he wants not to bring it up. First of all, because he's not interested in changing anything as a rule. And also, who knows what price Israel and the United States will have to pay in order to somehow compensate the Arabs for supposedly doing what should be an American policy anyway, but at the moment it changes the status quo, and Netanyahu is a very status quo person. So I don't see any declarations. If Israel had pushed for it very powerfully, yes.
Do you think Israel didn't push so hard?
Absolutely not. Actually, under the table, I think Israel has even been sending signals that, we're not, it's okay if it's taken off the agenda. We will not say anything.
Dr. Sherman, I'm sure you read the Israel Hayom interview, the paper owned by Adelson. They interviewed Donald Trump, and Donald Trump was actually saying that Israeli settlement is not helpful. Did that surprise you? I know that it surprised some Jewish Republicans that have been Trump supporters.
Well, yes, but I wouldn't read too much into it. I think in many ways Donald Trump is a blank page that Israel can write on. I think that if Israel were to adopt a strong, assertive, proactive policy, Trump would at worst be benign. I don't think he would resist it. But what I think even worse is adopting a vacillating, hesitant position, because I think Trump might interpret that as weakness and feel that we're not as strong as ally as we could be. I think Trump would appreciate a strong, a robust stance taken by Israel, and would at worst not try and obstruct it.
A strong, robust stance in front of Donald Trump. I happened to watch live the joint press conference between Canadian Prime Minister Trudeau and Trump, and Trudeau, even though he's very young, he seemed very experienced in knowing what not to say to tick off Trump in terms of contradicting his policy on refugees in that case. Do you think that Netanyahu will dare to contradict in any way Trump when they have their joint press conference?
At this point, I don't think there's anything to contradict. So I don't think he faces the risks that a Canadian Prime Minister, Canada right now has.
Well, if he was robust, if he was assertive and went beyond where Trump would like to be.
Well, the definition here of robust and assertive is my definition of foolish and reckless. So because we are talking of very different policies. Everyone likes to give them their name, that their judgment is. But Prime Minister Netanyahu at the moment has nothing to argue with the President Trump. President Trump didn't say anything that requires the Israeli Prime Minister to contradict him. So I think to begin with, he's not facing that danger.
There was well, I'll let you answer this, Dr. Sherman, but before you answer, I wanted to add in that, there was comment at the time that Prime Minister Netanyahu kind of lectured President Obama in their first meetings. I don't think he's going to try that with Trump.
Well, again, I don't think he was lecturing Obama. I think he was stating Israeli policy firmly. But when I say robust, I do not necessarily mean adversarial. All he needs to do is endorse many of Trump's pre-election statements, and he'd be on, in my opinion, the correct page. But, just to pick up on what Anat said about being robust and assertive, irresponsible and foolish, I keep wondering what has to happen for people who adopt the policy of supporting a two-state solution. What has to happen for them to admit they were wrong? After a quarter of a century of tragedy and trauma for two people, what has to happen for them at least to admit that there may be another option which is preferable?
All right, there's one more issue that I want us to touch on while we still have time, and that's the issue of Iran. Certainly it'll come up during the course of these discussions with Trump and Netanyahu. The Trump administration issued a warning to Tehran following the latest ballistic missile test. They say that there is a new sheriff in town, but Trump is not repeating his campaign promise to scrap the nuclear agreement between Iran and the world's leading nations. Let's go back to Dan Shapiro, and we'll also hear a brief comment from Iranian President Rouhani.
I think President Trump also wants to demonstrate a new and tougher range of options to be used against Iran in regards to its sponsorship of terrorism, its shipment of weapons to proxies around the region, its support for the Assad regime, and its ballistic missile programs. But I don't think he's prepared at this point to scrap the nuclear deal, which is doing exactly what it was supposed to do. It is keeping the Iranian nuclear program at bay with great visibility and every option still available to the United States and others if Iran were later to try to break out for a nuclear weapon.
در آمریکا بعضی از تازه‌کاران قدرت را در دست گرفتند. همه اونها باید بدانند در برابر ملت ایران تنها باید با احترام و تکریم با این ملت بزرگ حرف بزنند. برابر هر گونه تهدید و نابخردی و آتش افروزی با خرد، با استقامت، با ایستادگی، با قدرت خواهیم ایستاد.
Dr. Sherman, if you were the advisor to Netanyahu, what would you tell Trump regarding the Iranian deal and how to deal with the Iranian regime?
Well, I think I would try to convey to the Trump administration is that the only way that Iran can be reined in and not at some stage along the way renege on the agreement when it feels that it's close enough to weaponizing its nuclear capability is to confront Iran with a credible nuclear threat. Because Shapiro says, Ambassador Shapiro said, well, all the options are on the table. That's almost ridiculous because the agreement was arrived at because people said it's the only agreement possible. So if you're not prepared to brandish the nuclear option when Iran was on its knees economically and further away from nuclear capability, what option are you going to have when Iran has been resurrected economically and much closer to the nuclear weaponization of its capabilities?
Well,
So I think the sooner that Iran is confronted with a credible threat of large-scale military action, the sooner we will be able to rein in Iran as a renegade state and a major supporter of terrorism across the world.
Well, certainly in these very days, Trump is trying to figure out how to confront North Korea and its missile program. They already have nuclear weapons, unlike Iran, which doesn't yet have nuclear weapons. And they haven't figured that out. And do you agree that there must be a threat put on the Iranian regime to back off not only from its ballistic missile program, but also from its state sponsorship of terror?
We need to separate between the joint understanding and everything else. Iran's sponsorship of terrorism was never on the agenda. If the United States wants to confront that, whether in Syria or anywhere else, that's a new item that the United States needs to decide if it's willing to put the effort.
Should we encourage that?
I'm not sure. I mean, I must say, American involvement in the region has not necessarily been beneficial or effective. So I am very hesitant to encourage any American military involvement in this region, especially when it's not very clear what they necessarily want to achieve. But certainly they can take measures that are smarter on financial issues, on ensuring that money doesn't flow where it doesn't need to go, and being clear that the agreement is carried out in letter and in spirit. But I, in general, believe that America would do better in being humble about its abilities to achieve certain things rather than being some swashbuckling cowboy that doesn't have necessary an understanding of what it tries to achieve.
Dr. Sherman, short of nuking the Iranians, which is what I understood from your comment before, or threatening them with nuclear obliteration.
With credible harm.
Are there, what could we suggest to the Iranians could be a penalty if they continue to sponsor state sponsor of terror?
I don't think there's anything. And I think, just to pick up on what Anat said, the weakness of the nuclear agreement, the joint, I forget the exact initials, but the joint agreement with Iran, the weakness of that agreement was that it separated out between sponsorship of terrorism, between developing ballistic missiles, and the nuclear issue. It just isolated the nuclear issue for a short while, delayed the Iranian ability to achieve it, whilst allowing them to do everything else. And I think that was the grave weakness. But I don't believe that the Iranians will back down from anything. They resisted years of biting sanctions, and it was only right towards the end, after years and years, that they came to the table. So I don't believe that anything that is more genteel and less aggressive than credible military threat will convince them to do anything.
Final comment, Einat, we're just about out of time, but when they come out of that summit, what kind of a message are you expecting to hear?
I expect to see a strong, warm affirmation of the alliance, general kind of things about the importance of peace and achieving an agreement, but nothing specific, and just saying something that we look forward to how great this relationship is going to be. I think it's going to be all about tone and about nothing in substance.
All right, well, I think that's all the time we have today. I just want to say that I think about 70% of American Jewry is not going to be happy watching that press conference and seeing those two leaders together. It's all the time we have for this edition of ILTV Weekly. Thanks to my guests, Dr. Einat Wilf and Dr. Martin Sherman. I'm Steve Leibowitz, and thanks for being with us at ILTV Weekly.